Okay, so to meet my expectations, you should have out a pencil and you should have been waiting patiently for a guided note page. We are going to start a little mini unit in our microorganisms unit that is called Protists. Now, what we've done to get here is we've talked about cells. This is just a little reminder. We've talked about cells. We've talked about what it means to be alive. We looked at viruses and we determined that viruses are not alive. And then we moved on to bacteria. We covered that. We covered the fact that bacteria are alive, even though they're only one cell big, and that they have all of the characteristics of living things, all 7 of them. And so now it's time to move on to the next microorganism. Now, this microorganism is not always micro, but most of them are microorganisms. So you're just going to have to kind of let that definition gel a little bit and let it slide, okay? These notes are going to be completely guided. You have the note pages in front of you, and where at the very top it says Protist definition. So we'll get to all of that, and I will guide you and have you pause the video when it's time for you to catch up and write things down, okay? All right. So the Protist kingdom. Here are some pictures of protists that are common, and we'll talk about these different types of protists, and then we'll talk about some protists that are not, you wouldn't think that they were protists. Protist, the definition of a protist, is a single-celled organism of the kingdom Protista, such as a protozoan or a simple algae. Added to that definition is any eukaryotic organism that isn't a plant, animal, or fungi. Now, before you pause this to write that definition down, I want you to notice in this definition this quirky little addition at the bottom. Any eukaryotic organism that isn't a plant, animal, or fungi. It's the catch-all, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But what happened is when they were classifying living things, they classified animals. It was easy to tell what was an animal. They classified plants. It was easy to classify those. They classified fungi. And then lo and behold, they were left over with all these weird organisms that didn't fit in any of those categories, and they didn't even necessarily all fit together. But because of the way that the taxonomy and the classification system goes, they literally made a catch-all group called the Protists. And you're going to see how different some of these organisms can be from each other, even though they're classified in the kingdom Protista together. Go ahead and pause the video now and write this definition down. All right, so I led into this with the taxonomy, and I want to go ahead and review the taxonomy because we always want to know where we've been and where we're going. And the whole point of life science is to figure out what's living and what's not and how it all fits together on our Earth. And then, who knows, years from now, we may be trying to figure out how living things fit together with other planets. I don't know. But as of now, in this current time, we are looking at living things that live on our Earth and how they fit together and how they're similar and how they're different and how they all work together to make this wonderful world we live in. So looking at this taxonomy, remember we start with the domain, okay? We start with this super broad category that every single living thing fits into. And we have 3 domains that every single living thing can fit into. And so we had the bacteria, which we just studied, and we also had the archaeobacteria that we briefly talked about, that are ancient old bacteria. Now remember that these 2 groups, these 2 domains, have no nucleus in common. They're called prokaryotes, and so their cells have no nucleus. And they're not organized, and they don't have all these great membrane-bound organelles and such. So they each have their own group. Well, then we have this other domain over here, the eukaryote or eukaryote group, domain eukaryota. And every every living thing that lives and that's classified into this domain They all have a nucleus in their cells. Their cells are organized. They have those membrane-bound organelles like the Golgi body and the ribosomes and the nucleus and all of those things, and they're all in that cell and they're bound by those membranes, okay? And from this, we are now going to start working our way down the taxonomy little by little. And so from the domain Eukaryota, we are now going to branch into the kingdoms. And there are 4 major kingdoms for eukaryotes, and that's Protista, Plantae, which are plants, fungi, which are going to be your funguses and mushrooms, and Animalia, which are your animals, okay? And so you can see how we're going to work our way through this. But for now, our focus is kingdom Protista. So we've moved out of the domain bacteria, we've gone to the domain Eukaryota, and now we are working through the kingdom Protista. What I'd like for you to do is to pause this video and actually, no, not yet. You've got to put those in for you. Hey, thank you, Miss Burton. You're welcome. Let's go to the next slide. So this is what you're going to be adding in. The classification of Protists, okay? The classification of Protists, there are 2. We break them into 2 groups, okay? And so if you look at your note page, you can see 2 arrows coming off of Protista, okay? And in a few minutes, we're going to add that in and pause this video. You have plant-like Protistas or Protists and animal-like Protists. So see, we know there's a huge difference between a fern and you. You're not very much alike at all. However, even though we have some that are like plants here and like animals here, they all belong in this little catch-all group. So it goes down to plant-like and animal-like, and then from there we break those into little groups as well. And I'm looking at this PowerPoint and realizing some of my letters got moved to the next side or to the bottom, and I apologize for that. So for the plant-like, you have red, green, and brown algae. They're single-celled or multicellular. Look at this. See, they're not all single-cellular. Then for the animal-like, you have paramecium or paramecia, so that A should be up here. You have amoebas, that S should be up here, and you have parasites, okay? So let's go ahead and pause the video right now and fill in your taxonomy tree. All right, so let's go ahead and look at Protists in general. So we're just going to look at this general characteristics of all of these Protists. And here you go, you have these Protista here. And so they're a eukaryote. This is a fun little diagram that shows you that they are all up above here and they are in this eukaryota domain. So what do Protists have in common? Like, what can we say? What characteristics, general statements can we make about Protists? Well, one, we can say that they contain a hodgepodge of organisms. Hodgepodge. Everything that goes in here that couldn't really go anywhere else. And I love the way this says it's where all of the misfits of life are basically thrown. Then you could say that basically any newly discovered organism that isn't a plant, animal, or fungus gets called a Protist. So it is truthfully a major hodgepodge, okay? So what are some general features of Protists? Well, they're eukaryotic cells. We can say that about every one of them, okay? So eukaryotic. We can say about every one of them that they have a nucleus and other organelles in their cells. We can make this generalization that a vast majority of them are unicellular. However, some are multicellular. We can say, and this is a really vague description, they're either autotrophs or heterotrophs. And you're kind of thinking, well, duh, so is everything. So they're not necessarily one or the other. We can say that. There's over 200,000 different species that have been discovered to date. And many of them reproduce by binary fission. And that should sound familiar to you because that's just like those bacteria. So they're just going to divide themselves in half, and that's asexual reproduction, don't forget. However, some of them reproduce sexually and have complicated life cycles. So you can say that from about here down are just a bunch of little vague generic statements. Really, the only ones that are solid are these three up here. So, looking at this in a visual way, we can say that protists are eukaryotic. We can say that most of them are unicellular. We can say that they're a hodgepodge of guys. You could even write the word in misfits. I kind of like that. And then they're also heterotrophs or autotrophs. So if you're looking at your note page right now, we're going to have you pause the video and fill those 4 lines in that are right to the side of that big word protists in the circle. All right, so remember, we had divided these protists into 2 major groups. The first one is plant-like, and the second one is animal-like. So could you pause the video right here and write that down in? We would divide them into 2 major groups. 1 and 2 would be plant-like and animal-like. Go ahead and write that in. All right, so let's look at these major groups, some of these major groups of protists, okay? These are the plant-like protists. So we're now on the next page where it says plant-like protists, and the first type is going to be these cryophytes, okay? Cryophytes. These guys are diatoms and golden algae. You find them in fresh water and in salt water. They're microscopic, and they basically just float passively in water currents. Okay? They're in all kinds of water, and they just, like I said, they just kind of go along for the ride. Let's go ahead and pause the video right here for you to write down type 1, cryophytes, and then write their description in. Diatoms, just a little bit of just FYI, you don't have to write this down. This is just, a little bit of information. Diatoms are single-celled algae, okay? They are the only organism in the planet with cell walls composed of this transparent silica. So diatom cell walls are ornamented by these intricate and striking patterns of silica. Basically, you guys, silica is like glass. They have these little walls of glass that surround them. Diatoms are really important. They're a plankton in the ocean that lots of small animals will feed on. And then obviously in the whole cycle, in the whole food chain, then you have the bigger guys that eat them, and so on and so on and so on. This picture to the left is a living diatom, and since it's green, you should already know one thing about this guy, and that is it's an autotroph. It's an autotroph because it's got chlorophyll, which gives it that green color, which means it's going to make its own food from the sun through photosynthesis. Here's another picture of some diatoms up close. There are so many different shapes, and they're really quite beautiful up close. And you can imagine that these walls are made of of silica, kind of like glass. Okay. I like this page just that shows you a whole bunch more, and you can even see the varied colors in them. Now you have to remember, these are microscopic, so you're not going to be sitting in the ocean and go, oh, look at that really cool triangular diatom. I mean, you won't be able to see that, and so that's kind of what's fun about the microscopic world, is we're discovering things that we would never see with just our plain eyes. They are some of the most diverse protists on Earth. And we estimate that their species range between 20,000 and 2 million different ones. And I like this note down here. Scientists are discovering new species every year. So those of you that think that the Earth is boring, we got to go to space because we've already finished the Earth, and we're not even close. We're not even close to discovering the things that are on Earth. Okay, here are a few more pictures up close. You can see the intricacy here. It's beautiful. It's almost like artwork you would hang on your walls and things. Diatoms, like I said, in the food chains are very important. You get this plankton, which is the smallest, littlest, tiny microscopic pieces. You then have small fish and krill, like, sardines that are going to eat on this. Then bigger fish will eat these guys, and then even bigger will eat these guys, etc. Very, very important. And you'll see on your sheet that in the stars down there, plant-like protists produce almost 1/2 of the oxygen on Earth through photosynthesis. That is huge, because we've all been led to believe, remember we talked about this previously, that the rainforest gives us all of our oxygen, and if we cut down the rainforest, we'll have no oxygen, and that's just absolutely not true. I mean, I don't advocate for cutting down the rainforest, ever. It's beautiful, and it's a home to many things, and we want to use our earth responsibly. However, saying that the rainforest gives us all of our oxygen is absolute false, and we get half of it just from these plant-like protists that live in the ocean. So let's go ahead and pause the video right here, and let's go ahead and write down in those where those stars are on the note page, plant-like protists. All right, number two. Number two are going to be dinoflagellates. Dinoflagellates. And I may not have said before, and I apologize for this, those stars, that starred line that talks about the plankton, that should have gone up under number one. So I apologize. And if you could just draw a little arrow up that it goes up there. Now we're looking at type 2. And these are the dinoflagellates. Okay, these are algae, okay, and their description is that these organisms are usually marine and photosynthetic. So again, these guys are going to be making some of our oxygen. They're going to be making their own food, and they're going to also live in the water. And marine generally refers to salt water, not fresh water. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. I love this up close picture. You can see how intricate this algae is, and it's really quite beautiful, but when you see it from far away, you think, oh, gross, algae. All right, go ahead and pause the video right now and add in number 2, dinoflagellates, and their description. Now, something really cool about these I'm just going to call them dinos, if you don't mind, about these dino guys is that they possess a very awesome power. I say power, characteristic or trait, and that is they can glow. These glowing tides like this, they glow blue, and this is called bioluminescence, or being bioluminescent. Okay, and bioluminescent basically means the ability to chemically produce light from the body. So go ahead and pause the video right here and add that definition under bioluminescent. All right, so how do they produce this light? Now that you got the definition down, you're probably going, man, how does that work? So something happens in the water. It could be a swimmer, it could be anything. Some kind of movement happens. And when it moves, it kind of stirs the dino guys, okay? And it activates these things inside them. And as this action potential travels through their vacuoles and their vacuole membranes, which remember the vacuole is inside the cells, it opens these channels and allows protons to move about and go into these centillions. Okay, and when they do that, they interact with this luciferase, which is just a chemical, and it causes light to flash. And so when you look into the water, you don't see this whole process happen. All you see is glowing waves. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about the different kinds of algae that are in type 2, the dinoflagellates, okay? First, we have red algae. That's going to be your number one, and it can be a simple one-celled eukaryotic organism to a large multicellular organism, okay? And it's called red algae because, it's kind of a reddish color. It has red pigments in there that are more effective in gathering up the blue wavelengths of light deeper in water. They're an important part of the ocean ecosystem because they're eaten by fish, crustaceans, and gastropods. You're going to know about all of these guys when we get to our animals. We're going to study these in depth. Just remember them and that they eat and feed off of red algae. Go ahead and add red algae to your sheet for number one. The next one's green algae. There are over 10,000 species of green algae discovered to date. They contain the same I'm having a hard time talking tonight. The same photosynthetic pigments, chlorophyll, as other plants. The single-celled, and I'm not even going to try to say that, is considered by scientists to be similar to what gave rise to land plants, and that's for those of you that follow the evolutionary belief that things turned into other things and they evolved over thousands of years. Okay, they're saying that these guys right here were the first ones that gave rise to land plants. Okay, go ahead and record green algae on your note page. All right, then we have brown algae. Okay, brown algae, and these are large multicellular organisms of the Protist kingdom. So now these are not, look at this. This is huge. This is not going to be a single cell microscopic thing. But remember, this is a hodgepodge of misfits that are all just in this category. Though kelp look like plants, so kelp is an example of a brown algae, okay, and you've probably seen this before. They have no roots and have other cellular differences. So they couldn't be put in the plant category because they don't have roots. And plants, by definition, have roots. So you can see why they had to go into this other random category. Kelp are the fastest growing organisms in the ocean. Kelp can form large kelp forests, which are important ecosystems because they provide habitats in the ocean for many animals. And you can see in this picture right here, these fish the smaller fish can go into this kelp and seek asylum to get away from bigger predators. And I'm sure that there are other organisms that are going to feed on these as well. So go ahead and add brown algae to your note page. This just is a more up close picture, and you can see it's like taking a picture from down below looking up, and you can see how much of the sunlight these kelp forests block out. It's pretty amazing. But it's really neat to have a different view. And we've been talking about starting our nature journals and about looking at nature up close and differently. And this is definitely a different way to look at nature, is from the bottom looking up. We're going to pause. We're going to stop this video here, and we'll have to pick up with the next video with algal blooms.